Good morning and welcome to the International Institute for Strategic Studies. My name is Virginia Comolli. I'm the Senior Fellow for Security and Development here at IISS. For those of you who are unfamiliar with our organization, we are an independent think tank and charity that conducts work on security, defense, foreign policy, and increasingly development issues. We produce an extensive list of publications, and also we organize meetings, events, and conferences around the world, engaging with government officials, international organizations, the business community, civil society, and the expert community, all in the pursuit of our goal of informing decision makers and promoting the adoption of sound policies in the interest of peace and security. Before we enter our more substantive discussion, I'd like to extend a particularly warm welcome to the Indonesian delegation. This meeting is hosted in partnership between IISS and the Indonesian Embassy here in London, and I hope this marks the beginning of a very fruitful partnership. It is also a great pleasure and an honor to welcome Dr. Yanuar Nugroho, who works for the Executive Office of the President of Indonesia. He will open the discussion by offering 20 to 30 minutes worth of remarks on the theme of contextualizing sustainable development goals and open government partnership. He is responsible for the implementation of actionable government programs, both nationally and internationally, to ensure that Indonesia meets its commitments to the post-2015 Sustainable Development Agenda, the Open Government Partnership, climate change, and the green economy. He is also an honorary research fellow for innovation and social change at the Institute of Innovation Research at the University of Manchester. Today's meeting is on the record, and following Dr. Nugroho's remarks, there will be time for questions and answers. But without further ado, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Virginia. Good morning, everyone. Let me start with some remark first. I prepare this rather extensive slides, but I'm not going through all of them because I prepared this partly for my students and my colleagues, and I will leave it with you so that you can read it after that. And second, although I try to make it more academic, knowing you here, but perhaps I will be, this is like a share of experience from the perspective of a former negotiator for SDGs and now being responsible to implement it in Indonesia. So please forgive me if I'm too quick when talking to you. You just can raise your hand and ask me to slow down a bit. I know, although it is not a lecture, but I would like to give you, this is what we are going to discuss today. Some paradigm shifts and then trajectory of what we now know as sustainable development and open government, and then try to look deeper at it, whether it is a policy process or whether it is a politics, both at the UN level and the national level, and how we take it at the national level. And then let's see, we can discuss together to look at the opportunities and challenges when we implement this. I will take specifically the case of Indonesia to let you know and to share with you our experience, what works, what doesn't work, or what work and what don't work until now. And in the end, I would try to offer some reflections. I think, let me start with this question, if any of you would like to answer. You watched the movie, right? Do you think that sustainable development can save humanity? Do you think sustainable development can save humanity? Let's not answer now. We can come back to this question in the discussion. But I remember what Daniel Bell said in 1987 about the nation state and the problems of life and the role of state. To some extent, the nation state sometimes becoming too small for big problems of life and too big for the small problems of life. It depends on how you look at it. The following statistics, I think, is redundant because I believe most of you know about this. This is what we have. This is the word in one page. What we have here, the population, GDP, etc. I think you know this, and I'm not going to spend time on this. also the dilemma between the progress and the problem that we have. But if I go to Indonesia, you might want to see this. This is Indonesia at night. What remains is just Java, some part of Sumatra, few part of Kalimantan, and the eastern part of Indonesia practically non-existent. I used to teach statistics in Manchester, my student, but I do not think I need any statistic, let alone advanced statistic, to tell you about inequality. Google Map, Google Earth at night can tell you what inequality is in the country like Indonesia. And this is the challenge that we have in our context in Indonesia. Of course, some trace back to the theory or to the literature, took aspect even to 1600, the first notion when people start to talk about sustainability. What we now, again, I'm going to be very quick on this because it's not a lecture. What we mostly see today, perhaps, is this notion, how we conceptualize sustainable development. Please come in, Visa. Visa is my student from Netherlands. She's coming here for PhD supervision, but now she has to sit down there for you. Okay. The concept that traces back to 16, I think it gives us a very basic, I would say, imperative to rethink about development. This is just my thinking when we look at progress. I teach innovation back in Manchester and development. I look innovation as in a broader perspective and look at the progress. This is how we, at least academically, understand between progress and how we do progress, how we aim for progress for development. But then now they are very much under public scrutiny because I think the challenge is that it is not just focusing on the market economy, but also address other development problems. What I emphasized there, eradicating poverty, if you remember the statistic earlier, bridging the gap of inequality, promoting social inclusion, and how it addresses environmental degradation. So there is a new direction actually when we look at this, when we take all the more recent knowledge about this, that we need to be able to work on something that help us tackle those goals. So if we look at the underlying assumption of development is insertion in a market economy, and the underlying value is that this insertion provides people more than just mere survival, then this inscription in accumulation process should only work not only economically, but also environmentally, socially, and politically. This is where I think then the tension in development happens. Because from economic perspective, for example, the economic value of logs are clear, but it is not easy to see economic value in forests, for example. Or to see the economic value of road is easier than to see the economic value of green space in a city, for example. This is where the tension happens. But actually, in a deeper level, what we are dealing with is actually uncertainties. This is what development is about, addressing uncertainties. Legal uncertainty, health uncertainty, security uncertainty, education uncertainty. I think with this last 3 slides, I tried to lay out here with you both the trajectory of theoretical dynamics when we understanding development and progress, but also the challenge. Now, let's go to the main business, SDG and open government. Perhaps before I continue, if you are not aware yet, Indonesia, UK, and Liberia were the co-chair of the high-level panel on the post-2015 development agenda. After that high-level panel ended, it provided us with, some people claim, of course some of you would not agree perhaps, with the one of the most progressive report of the UN Secretary General at that time, Ban Ki-moon. It fed directly to the process of open working group. I was lucky. The Indonesian government sent me as a drafter. Of course, my name is not there. My president's name is there, and the UK Prime Minister. And then my colleague here is David Hallam, now the special envoy for the Prime Minister for post-2015, and the Liberian drafter. After this report, I was lucky that my government sent me as a negotiator in this process. So I witnessed all this process from back 2012 up until 2015 when we ratify SDGs. This diagram is just to tell you that it is complex, you know this. But what happens here is that what we have, people today focus on this. 17 goal, 169 targets. If you read this, I encourage you to also read the introduction, because there is quite a fundamental shift happening there. In MDG, we remember the 3 Ps, people, planet, profit. In the SDG, there is no more 3 Ps. People, planet, yes, there is no profit anymore, but prosperity. And then we have partnership and peace. Security and peace is now inherent part of the development agenda. Some of you would say this is just jargon, this is just the political, political blah 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 from the UN for other country, perhaps. But as a negotiator, and some people ask me when I presented this first among academic colleagues, they ask me, how much is the evidence based being used there? Well, I said, yes, it was used, but not too much. Because in the UN, it is politics. Take and give. Although in the university you are taught that there is no more northern and southern country, rich and developing. The reality is there is. The house was split, so I'm going to show you some. Let me move after SDG to open government. If you look at the trajectory, 2010 July, Obama delegation came to Indonesia to establish innovative global movement of transparency, and then with 7 other countries, including UK. So Indonesia and UK has this big interest in SDG and open government. We established the OGP, Open Government Partnership, and then you sent the chair, OGP, 2013, and then we had this Asia Pacific Regional, and then Indonesia was elected as steering committee. UK was before Indonesia, so UK was the chair in 2012. And then now, starting from 8 countries, now we have 75 countries participating in OGP as a new multilateralism. Some people disagree with OGP. Why? Because at the very core of it, government and civil society sit at the equal standing. So we treat minister and social and CSO activists at the same level. And some people, even in the decision making, and some people are not really happy with this. But this is just the quick statistics. I will leave it with you, so you do not need to take notes on it. But this is some the outcomes of those difficult trajectory. We started with only 8 countries in the world, and we had a very strong objection at the time in the UN. I remember how the UK delegates, Indonesia delegates, tried to get the room in the UN negotiation, although informally outside the room, to get this movement backed up and promoted. And finally, we are now where we are. So this perhaps is the question of all of those. Are they really policy outcomes, or they are outcome of some politic negotiations? When we did these negotiations, outside the UN, there are so many rallies and demonstrations. They are afraid that the SDG, what we now know as SDG, is no more than just political jargon sold by the UN for the countries. Despite those, I put you those goals which are contentious. They are highly contested at the time. All goals and all targets, of course. But For, in my records, goal number 5, gender equality. Goal 10, at the time still proposed goal 10, climate change. Goal 16, peace and inclusive society, rule of law, government institutions, and MOI, means of implementation. They are the goals that we spend most of the time. I remember before we all agreed finally in the final draft of, at the time, Open Working Group report, the negotiation started on Friday 9 o'clock and it ended Sunday 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Nobody left the UN building, so we were, because of the negotiation. And I could still remember vividly what happened there. There are groupings, there are contact groups, and they all came with their own interest, of course. While for open government, it is more smooth. I take my own president's word here, verbatimly. Adoption of openness principle is the only way for the government at all levels to gain legitimacy and public trust. This is what he said himself when he endorsed open government. This is why Indonesia is now progressing this way, embracing this digital technology, some of it, but also embracing this openness culture to some extent because of what he said. Is this policy? Is this politics? I don't know, but let's discuss. So, when we come into practice, this is just, I put this specifically because this is the Indonesian government vision for development. Nawacita, 9 ideas. What we do is this. Rather than implementing SDG as it is at the national level, what we did, my office is responsible for this one, is we try to fit what SDG goals to national vision, to the president's vision. If I can write something, but it's okay. You remember the number. We have 169 targets. Indonesia doesn't adopt all of them. We only take 96. We develop the indicator, we take the indicator from the UN, and we develop our own indicators. Why? This is rather delicate, but let me make myself clear. For our government at the time, despite that Indonesia was among the lead in the negotiation process, we didn't really care, the new government didn't really care about SDG, about OGP. What any new government would care is whether their political promise can be implemented. That's it. So, when I remind my seniors, the ministers, sir, madam, we have this global commitment on this. Wait a moment, I want to do my homework first, not that one. So, the other way, to me, it gave me challenge to not only contextualizing it, but also re-articulate it. So I told the president through the chief of staff, of course, that SDG is like our national plan, but it is a global plan. It can help you achieve your vision, not the other way around. So why we are doing SDGs? Not because there's global commitment, no. They don't buy the argument, but because it helps you achieve the national priority. So we came up with this, and we just issued our presidential regulation. In one page, this is the regulation is all about. I tried to put it concise in one page, that regulation. This is the regulation. On SDG, the first among member states, when we submitted our VNR this month, 19th of July, out of 44 countries who submitted the VNR, Voluntary National Review, Indonesia was the only one at the time submitted the full report and came out with the national-wide regulation. How we do this. Whether it's good or not, of course, always, and you know very well. There's always pros and cons, but at least this is what we have. We realized that we need the regulatory and policy framework, we need the institutional arrangement, and accountability mechanism. And because this has to involve all actors in the society, this is what we now do with the SDG. I will skip this. This is just how we operationalize Goal 7. But let me get you into one example, target number 5, goal number 5, for example. Because I remember when it was negotiated, it's rather funny, we would see some interesting groupings. Some countries who used to be or who supposed to be quite progressive for gender equality, some then became very reserved on this. But for Indonesia, look at this, look at how we take it. We have the global targets over there. Okay, global targets over there. And then from the global targets, we put our national targets. For targets that do not apply, we don't apply. This is why from 169, we only take 96. And we put numbers to translate that targets. That targets at the UN level is basically outcome. But remember, the government works with outputs. You can talk about maternal mortality, it's outcome. But when you talk with our Minister of Health, you will talk about how many doctors we deploy to which areas when. So it's outputs. So we need to be careful, and we need to be quite, on the one hand, on the other hand as well, that we need to be quite firm in ensuring that the output will help us achieve the outcome. And this is the challenge. So this is the challenge in implementation in one page. We have substantive problem, which is usually top-down from the government, and so government would formulate their activities to tackle the challenge, while actually what are seen and understood by the government are usually not what other people see. So the ideal would be this, that even the problem formulation should be not only the government that do it, but also other sectors. And also we have technical problems, because usually the problem is that different ministries have their own way of working, no coordination. So at the very abstract level, I still aim to publish this in the journal, but not yet there. So any one of you, but I try to conceptualize. The problem with the coordination, I think, is one which is most hampering at the moment, the implementation of SDGs. Now, back to open government now, two stories. Open government, from the beginning, we have two components already. Civil society, this is the main CSOs, and the components of the government, which established national secretariat, and then they have the participatory policy making, from planning to monitoring. So we have the co-creation, co-implementation, and co-evaluation. I'll be quick. And then what they do, this is what happens at the global initiative. In Canada, we have this Service Canada from outcome of the OGP. We have this in the UK, DataGov UK, Kenya Open Data, Government Digital Service in the UK, South Korea. In Indonesia, we have this single mechanism for public complaints, and then One Data, Open Budget Index, EITI, and we are now working on the One Map as well. I will skip this. This is this NAPS National Action Plan of those countries. In Indonesia, for example, now, what we do, if you remember the diagram, we need to put it in action to show that it works. Rather than having national regulation, top-down, the SDG type, open government is more bottom-up. So we show that in Aceh, the public service works. In Jakarta, the open data works. In Bandung, social fund transparency works. In Bojonegoro, open contracting works. See, different strategies. SDG is still very much top-down, naturally because of the outcome of the UN agreement. But open government is more bottom-up. But both, I think, this is my reflection, we have this 5 challenges. 1, contextualization. Second, measure. And those are the key words that I put here. Open, interoperable data, alternative variables. Third, baseline and target. Fourth, indicators. Last but not least, of course, resource. Both SDG and OGP, they face the same challenge. So, in the implementation, I put there deliberating public participation, because the only way, I think, we need the hub that links public participation and initiatives and the implementation. So those 5, I put it as an imperative: opening up spaces for public participation, bureaucracy reform, quality public service delivery, partnership between government and society, and working it out at the local level. Well, all of you, most of you are researchers, and you know the disconnect between research world and policy world. So I will skip all this. You know all of this. The sense and nonsensical of evidence-based policy. But just to show you how it works, I take Bojonegoro. Used to be listed as one of the 10 poorest municipalities in Indonesia. Bojonegoro is here. One of the poorest municipality. Now, Bojonegoro is the pilot of OGP with other 14 municipals in the world, with Madrid, with Paris. So, Bojonegoro. And it's no more the poorest. And you see, this is the performance center because of OGP, and now Bojonegoro embraced SDG. Much earlier before we have the presidential regulation on SDG, Bojonegoro has issued their own regions regulation on SDGs. So they use SDG indicator much earlier before the president issued the regulation. And so the economic growth is nearly 4 times of the national economic growth. The poverty rate, okay, is real. Unemployment. Sorry?
Real or real growth?
Real. And the municipal. So this is what we see. So just few reflections from me. One, we have this stories, some implications to research and policy. They all seek to address today's and future's world problems. Of course, concerning well-being, progress, environment. So perhaps we need to be more alert, but also more creative and more receptive on the new research agenda, new policy agenda. Not because I teach foresight in Manchester, but anticipative and more foresight rather than forecast. Foresight is about shaping the future. Forecast is about predicting. It's not just predicting. It is like the future that we want. Second, since both are participatory in its inception and implementation, new modes, new forms of collaborations of private sector, government, civil society is needed, very much. Because they start from intergovernmental process, but it has to end or to work at the inter-community level. The negotiation could be intergovernmental, and yes, they are, or they were. But the implementation, inter-community. OGP and Agenda 2030 SDGs, they are clear on the what and how. Perhaps not very clear on the why. I told you, it's not all of them are evidence-based policy when we decided the goals and targets. So action-oriented multidisciplinarity is important, resource management. And then the two last point is that they are political commitments. So we need to focus on translating these political commitments into development policy and planning. And data, data, data for accountability. So I think in the end, this is what happens in Indonesia. People are protesting about reclamation in Bali, new cement factories in Central Java, etc. The question is development for whom? I think in the end, it is not about the government. It is about the people. And remember this, always this triangle: policy, politics, polity. And the question about our intervention is these three. How can our intervention be influential to the policy? How our intervention influences politics? And how it become or provide polity. I think I will end with these slides, not because we have coffee over there, but how to start. We need to have enabling conditions for partnership exchange. One. Second, opportunities to access policy space. Think tanks like you, like yours, you work in the academy and the university. We need to have exchange between the government and then the think tanks, or where the knowledge producers. I'm an academic myself, I'm still part of Manchester. When I was tasked to be in the office of the president, I know the tension. I feel myself the tension. I'm academic, I write in the journals, but when I sit as a bureaucrats or policy makers, and then I had to deal with ministers, director generals, well, you know, sometimes what is feasible academically is not feasible technically or politically. And you know, that's why it's important to put and to look at the knowledge management. I know some of you are skeptical. I myself skeptical with the term knowledge management. How can you manage knowledge? I teach the subject as well. But that's why I put quote unquote. But we need to have a repository of best or good or working practices. We need to have this exchange at that level. What happens there, what works there, what doesn't work there, why? And then policy support, of course. So, I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Naomi. I work for the Department for International Development covering
DFID.
Asia. Yeah.
So you know David Halam, right?
Yeah.
Yes. He's my colleague when we drafted the report.
Ah, okay. That's good to know. So basically, I work on the lessons learning agenda.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a new team. I've only been in the post for about 2 months, and I was basically our main sort of target is to make sure that DFID is involved in a culture that shares and captures failures and successes, and like shares it across not just within DFID but across government. And I was wondering if you have come across anything in the Indonesian government that does this.
Okay, thank you. The penultimate row over there. And then the gentleman in the last row over there.
Thank you, Virginia. Pak Yanuar, my name is Nurul Ihwan. I am from BKPM, and we have the representative office of BKPM here, Indonesia Investment Promotion Center. So it means that as the promotion center, we are dealing with promoting Indonesia to the potential investors here. So my questions will be, implementations is very significant in order to make this becoming our materials in promoting Indonesia as a kind of destination for investment. But how and into certain level, or what level is this SDG and OGP implemented into providing very clear informations that will connect? It is not only about clear, but the logic that will connect among organizations or government institutions and even state-owned enterprises that could be having one message to be over to the potential investors, so then they are going to have the same thing when they are going to the government, to the state-owned enterprise or to other institutions. So then they will not be confused by different informations providing by different institutions. It is open, but it is not clear. Thank you.
Okay,
Good.
thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Shan Rajgopal. I'm the chairman of Inflex Group, also the visiting professor to Esther University and board of director for Aberystwyth University. You gave an excellent speech. This is a highly complex topic that you have actually condensed within half an hour. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. My question is more related towards, I understand the complexity of this overall initiative that you have understood. From your executive office viewpoint, is there a way that you are tracking some of this initiative in terms of a timeline? And if so, how are you doing it? And as a result, are you also have prioritized them in relation to whatever criteria that you have in mind, or as the government has in mind in terms of how these initiatives to be launched? That's my question.
Good question.
Thank you. Would you like to address?
Thank you for the comments and questions. Firstly, about David, yes, I think we've been. I think David has been working in Indonesia for quite some times, and I think what is, forgive me, this is the perspective from my office, but I think what we may be able to harvest more in the future is on the in the SDG. What is unclear is about Dr. Shan mentioned earlier about how we track the progress. If there is a single research question that there is a question that you would ask me, and then I can only answer one research question, is that how we track progress. it is not just about availability of data. It is not just about the accountability, how we get the data, but how we take those indicators, put it in a context, and look at different actors and stakeholders work on it. I would give you one example. The maternal mortality in Indonesia is 359 per 100,000 live births, with 6 million births every year. It means 16,000 to 17,000 mothers die every year. Can you imagine 1.777? It crashed every week. That is the visualization. How do we track progress from 359 to 309, the targets, or the target of SDGs? Because you need to look at the local context, how people understand health, how you engage the society with the community. So, of course, we'd be very happy, and if the FID, together with the, I don't know, in Indonesia it's British Council usually, we work at that. But I'm very keen on, as academic myself, looking at the research in the way we can track progress. We do not have much longitudinal data. We as Indonesia, not UK. I know that in the UK you have very good data sets, but for Indonesia, our National Statistics Survey, IFLS, I think it went back the furthest, I think 23, 24 years ago, not longer than that, which is not enough if we want to track it. So I think this is what is important. And then from BKPM, Pak, I think you're right that open but not clear. We have challenge, if you allow me to say, we have challenge in how different government understand and implement the principles. For example, perhaps from your perspective, you would like to see how the SDG and OGP are beneficial to attract investors, right? We have goal 16, but I do not think any investor would care about goal 16. That's not the consideration. They would like to see whether there is a rule of law in place, there is a law enforcement there, there is, ease of doing business. This is why open government links and SDG of course, links very closely in a practical term, creating the investment climate and pushing this through, we call it now in the national strategy of EODB, ease of doing business. What they are, it's actually open government in practice. It has to be clear when you submit your paperwork for permit, when you can get it, what are the criteria. This is where not everyone is happy with the change. I have to say, I know this is recorded, but it's just, I mean, common knowledge. We need to work more. We need to work harder on that front, because what we now know and what we now have are disintegrated, if not fragmented, policy. For example, there was a promise or a pledge that the investment in the natural or in the environmental sector would be granted within 3 days, the permit. This is actually in contradiction to the National Strategy for Environmental Protection, because strategic environment analysis would need much longer than 3 days to say it is a yes or a no for an investment. How do we actually reconcile this? Actually, with open government, if we have a better map and a better tata ruang, spatial planning, we would know, or we would have known that the certain areas would be used for what. Okay, so when the permission to do business in that certain area is accepted or is received, that request, then people can work on it quickly. But the problem is that we do not have this basis. Yeah. So when one agency pushes for quicker service, to some extent or in some cases, we are not quite ready with the infrastructure to do that. I would say infrastructure in terms of data, infrastructure in terms of basic regulations. So I agree with you, and this is call for everyone, because here in London, I think, we have this London Anti-Corruption Summit back in 2016, I think. And Indonesia was one of the signatories for the BO, beneficial owners. And it is a big thing in open government now. And being or sitting as a steering committee, we cannot but do that. So, of course, from my office, I know that this is not a satisfying answer, but yes, it is clear that we need to work hard. We need to have better coordination. We need to have, but also wider perspective, that there are things that make sense and do not make sense. And so I'm happy to continue the discussion later, but I think for now this is what I can answer. And then last one, Dr. Shan, I think you're very right that a tracking initiative, especially tracking the progress, is one of the most pressing issue. If you look at the 44 reports, now finally all submitted to the UN for the for international review, one big question is always how we can claim an achievement or attainment or progress in the SDGs. When you talk about the universal health coverage, how would you do it? What data you are using? How did you get the data? Through which means and mechanisms? Are they publicly open for scrutiny or not? Things like that. So I think one of the biggest lessons learned from this VNR is that we realized that learning from MDGs, we had 5 to 8 years of lag time. For SDG, we wanted to have it much shorter. But apparently, when we submitted this 44 countries, member states review, we're still lagging behind. We ratified the SDGs in 2015, and by 2017, people are still trying to grasp and to understand what SDGs is. And in most cases, they see SDG as extension of MDGs, because there are plenty of homework things that were not done yet in MDGs, and they are carried over. So there is a baggage, sort of. So I agree with you, and also back to our colleague from DFID. I know DFID and ESRC often works together to have some research call. I think in that area would be very interesting. And look at the new development, new national planning. National planning has been, I think, quite. We are doing it, but in terms of theory and methodology, it is not progressing really well. I look at the literatures. The peak was in the 1960s, and then going down up to 2000. Yes, many countries, they do national planning, but in terms of theoretization, no, not much. I had a discussion yesterday in Manchester, and we are looking at that. We just got a grant from ESRC to look at that. Anyway.
Thank you. Oh, wow. We have a few people there. The first row, the gentleman, Alia and
Thank you, Pak Yanwar. I'm Vito Tar from Indonesian Embassy. You know that as you has mentioned that we just carried over what the MDGs has already actually agreed like 30 years ago. There was also MDG that the goal that should be reached in 2015, and now it's the change will be like the name of the platform will be SDG. So what is actually the difference between MDG and SDGs in the international process, and what do you think in your perspective as a negotiator should the international community should do to differentiate the 30 years, 15 years process that we have now and another 15 years?
Okay.
What should the international community agree on that? Is that, should we agree on the technical cooperation, or should we agree on the level of the ODA, or should we agree on the, I'm talking about the practicality.
Yeah.
Or we just should agree in the, you said, the common language on the policy.
That's right.
And what do you think in Indonesia's role in that? Thank you.
Thank you. Can you pass the mic?
Thank you very much. Alia Mubayed from IISS, Director of Geoeconomics. I'm just wondering how, when you have a baseline with objectives to attain, how in your process do you account for a change in the global environment, particularly geoeconomic, geopolitical shifts, reversal of policies, let's say like we are seeing now under the US administration, for example, on climate change. Obviously, these are important elements that could change the path or your attempt to shape the future the way you want it. It may take you somewhere else. Do you do a scenario planning as part of your exercise at the level of the presidency, and how is this actually encompasses the various stakeholders? Thank you.
Thank you. And the second row, the gentleman.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Zohir Yudin from Lloyd's of London. My question is related to a previous one on investors and private sector. In your experience, were there any particular points of contention between the private sector and the rest of the stakeholders in the negotiating process? And just on a second question, what do you see the role as on the private sector for implementation?
Yeah. I will try to answer quickly so that we can have another round. Well, you are the negotiator actually. I'm not trained as a negotiator. I'm an engineer by training. And I understand very much the confusion, and especially when we come into implementation. Not only government agencies, but also development partners, they're also quite puzzled with the process of SDGs. Having the outcome there, and practically we still MDG 1 to 6 there. Basically this SDG is MDG plus fleshing out issues on environment and on partnership. If you ask what's the difference in terms of the way we restructure global targets, I think SDG is quite clear in at least proposing the means to achieve it. In MDG, you have goal 1 and then 1A, B, C, or 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. In SDGs, you have goal 1 and then targets 1.1, 1.2, and 1.A, 1.B. In SDGs, I would say. Just to show you an example that we do, this one. See, you always have this A, B, C. So this image implementation. They are trying to provide you with sort of guidance how you achieve it. Whether you want to do it or not, it's up to you. From the development planner perspective, to me, this is clearer. If I were a national planner, it helps me plan. It helps me derive indicators. It helps me come out with outputs to achieve that outcomes. But substantively, we are not moving very much from MDGs. Most of the world, of course here, the advanced society, advanced country, you worry more on the privacy of the data with this big data coming out, how much but in many parts of the world, we are still dealing with more of the same things: poverty, inequality, conflicts, the rise of populism, right-wing populism here and there, and that's the problem. Also, what is different related to the last questions, is that the role of non-state actors are more clear in SDGs rather than MDG. In MDG, it was assumed, or perhaps it was taken for granted. But for the SDGs, the whole goal 17 is about partnerships, how government or state could work together with non-state actors. In Indonesia, let me give you one example. Our state budget this year is 2,080 trillion rupiah. How much in pound sterling? Don't remember. But it can only actually finance no more than 17% of the whole development agenda. Really. So private sector is one, if not the most important actors to sit together to be on board with the government. So if you look at President Jokowi's now, my current president's now strategy is inviting investors, inviting private sector to the word, sorry for the lame word, participate, but basically to take part in the development of infrastructure, investment in the real sector, things like that. And I can see how it resonates in the SDGs, the role of private sector. That's why, I mean, if after this session, if you have time while you're on your bus on the tube, read the report, but not the goals and targets. Read at the introduction. I think it is not sophisticated, academically sophisticated, but it is quite good that the UN published things like that, I think. And the most difficult question, I think. Different countries or different governments would have different strategy in dealing with the geoeconomy, geopolitical dynamics. In my country, we have, in our government, we have the National Ministry for Development Planning. We exercise a few methods, or some methods, looking at it. Perhaps not as extensive as what you are doing here, but yes, we do it. Whether then it really informs the policy, that's a different thing. To give you a picture, we have USAID, we have our colleagues from the UK, we have our colleagues from Australia, DFAT, we have the World Bank, we have international organizations like WRI, World Research Institute, operating. They have their own concern, they have their own knowledge. And we have our National Ministry of Planning, my office, other technical ministries. They all provide inputs. For someone like me, sitting in the office of the president, getting input is great. But if I get so many inputs in the different directions, well, perhaps I can still handle it, but I'm not sure whether my boss can still handle it, or other senior ministers can still handle it. Sometimes, and this is the grave, I think, the grave risk, sometimes the need to have more hands-on and practical advice reduces quite a lot the complexity of the issue. For example, investment in the infrastructure of high-speed train. Now it's very much contested. Or private sector investment in the reclamation of sea in Jakarta, or in Bali, or in Manado. Because we are not talking only about technical feasibility, but also the political consequences. Now, if I escalate this into international level, for example, climate change, and how US withdrew from it. I went to DC 3 weeks ago in the OGB ministerial meeting. I represented my minister because he couldn't make it, and I openly asked this question. And you know, our colleagues there said, well, despite that the US as a government withdrew from it, but you know, California, if it were a country, it would be 7 in the world. They still comply, they still embrace it. It struck me in a way that, yes, actually we could have different strategies. That's why I think it confirmed me, it affirmed me what the region in Bojonegoro did. Even before the presidential regulation on SDG was issued, he himself, he embraced SDGs, he did it. Perhaps because he was an intellectual himself, he was a previous chancellor of the university, and he did it. And to me, why we should stop this kind of initiative. So I think what happens at the global level, of course, it has an impact at the national level, but also it depends how we contextualize this kind of challenge and come up with quite organic strategy. This is why I object rather strongly if that strategy is pushed at the even regional level. No, we need to have our national strategy, perhaps more. Another round if you want, if not, if it's enough, I think it's up to you.
Okay, I think we can take those
Two.
two and then bring the meeting to a close. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Sinta. I'm postgrad fellow at the RGS. My question, Dr. Nugroho, is looking at the inequality map of Indonesia you shared at the beginning of your presentation. Do Indonesian government identify baseline and target differently for different region at a given time? And if yes, how do you identify it? Thank you.
Okay.
And the lady next door.
And Ibu Yuyun?
Yes. Thank you for the opportunity. It was a great presentation. Although I read all the reports, but it's impressive to see it on the screen. I would like you to explain or elaborate more about the financing to achieve the SDGs.
Yes.
You mentioned before the participation of private sector, but as you mentioned also earlier, that local government involvement also crucial. And what do you think about leadership or champions at the local level? Because regardless the party that's supporting this head of cities or mayors and so on, some leaders at the local level are really outstanding and can be used as the best practices or lessons learned for other regencies. And lastly, I don't know, I'm not quite sure about the role of provincial government, because it's somehow they are representing the national agencies, national government at the regional level, but I don't quite see their involvement in this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I would start from the last because it then relates to how we see this map. Financing SDG, I think financing development has been quite hot topics over the past few years, because we are now, I think, we have now realized how limited our resources are, and specifically in the SDGs, the value of DRM, domestic resource mobilization, is one of the most, not promising, but one of the most pressing issues, how we can mobilize resources domestically. I remember that some countries disagreed with this proposed target, because they thought that it would provide excuse for advance for developed countries to retreat from giving or to refrain from providing assistance to developing countries. But what is interesting to see the development in the at the local level is that with this, the emergence of, I would say, new economy alongside with this new digital technology, it is interesting to see how the economy at the local level grows, although it may not directly contribute to the national economic growth. There is always a lack. So when we look at financing development in the or through the conventional lens, like having donors helping the government, I'm afraid we are not going to see it anymore. And I know my colleagues in the civil society has been protesting here, and they're complaining why there is no more money available for them. But I think what is important, or what is emerging now, is the capability and capacity of local governments to mobilize their own resources. In Gunung Kidul, one kabupaten, one municipal in Central Java, in Yogyakarta, in Aceh, in Bojonegoro, they do not really rely on state budget, and they manage to get out of poverty. So, Ibu, while on the one hand it is important to, and I agree, it remains important to look at how we can finance development, especially when we look at the regional level with triangular cooperation, South-to-South cooperation as well. I think it is important to look at the potentials that local governments have. Now come to your question, the role of provincial. In the US, we have these states. In Indonesia, our decentralization is now down at the municipal levels. To some extent, it is interesting to see that granular level, but also it poses us challenge for coordination. I think provincial level can have a very important role in ensuring that in the province there is sort of, sorry again for using the word harmony, but basically more comprehensive development agenda at that level, at provincial level, which at the moment is not yet there. Then, the question of this. Yes, in Indonesia, inequality, even President Jokowi thinks that inequality is the most important problem, challenge. This is why he focuses on the infrastructure. He believes that in the long run, it will help the country to deal with inequality. Of course, if we study development, development studies, we know that infrastructure development, the impact would be at least n+3 or n+4 even. So we cannot see the result now, and it becomes now the political agenda to attack him. But I think, and if you look at the national development planning, we have different strategies and different approach for tackling inequality. What remains problematic is the way bureaucracy see it. Because the bureaucracy, I'm sorry, I know my colleagues here are part of bureaucracy, and now myself, I'm part of it as well. But bureaucracy tends to see the easier way to do it, rather than going extra miles. For example, having one-size-fits-all policy is what is the most dangerous in education, in health, in many other things. So I think, despite that we have national strategy to tackle inequality differently, but the approach of doing development by line ministries, I'm afraid remains the same, and it is why we need bureaucracy reform, to encourage bureaucracy to deal with it at an appropriate level and approach. I think we can continue in the the break after this, because I'm afraid we have to stop now. Thank you.
Well, thank
Virginia.
you very much. This was I think this was a most informative discussion. As you said, we could carry on and unpack many of these thoughts and ideas. I particularly took note of the fact that you highlighted the role of local government. We in the Security and Development Program at ISS also have a strong interest in that, in the role of municipal authorities and what they can do in terms of security and development. It's been a pleasure hosting you here, and as I said at the beginning, it's been a pleasure cooperating with the Embassy of Indonesia. I'd like to thank the Embassy delegation, and from our side, particularly my colleague Georgia, for putting this together. Thank you all for your inputs, and I look forward to seeing you soon again here at ISS.